Thought it'd be a great time to be joined by someone I spend every Sunday morning with here on the station, the former GM of both the Jets and the Dolphins, the founder of the 33rd team, and you watch him everywhere on ESPN. Mike Tannenbaum joins us now. Mike, hope you're having a great summer. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Jake, good to be with you. It's a familiar voice at an unfamiliar date and time.
No doubt. So I have to start with this because I caught your appearance on the National Morning Show the other day on Sportsmanlike, and you told a story about your approach when you go out to dinner and your approach specifically to how you order food. Can you share that with the audience? I found it to be fascinating.
Yeah, I think the food just needs to hit the table. Like the object of the exercise, and, we were just out the other day with the Schefters that was out there publicly, but appetizers need to be ordered immediately. You want them on the table, and then from there, other things can happen, the drinks and all that. But the interminable waiting for food after just sitting there, like maybe I'm getting older and less patient, but I can't stand order drinks and then you don't see the waiter or waitress for like a half an hour.
Wow. So it's like immediate for you then. You sit down, you want to make sure you place the apps, get it in as quickly as possible, if I'm following that correctly?
Immediately. But ideally, before the drinks.
Wow. What's the go-to Mike T appetizer?
Well, it just depends. Context is everything. It could be baked clams. It just depends on, where we are. So, if you want to pick the restaurant, Jake, I can, make some appetizer suggestions.
I love it. We will definitely take you up on that. All right, as far as the football goes, take us inside just from your perspective as a former GM. What actually goes on this time of year? Everyone says it's the slowest time of year. So when you were running the Jets and the Dolphins and you knew you had about a week and a half or so before training camp, what were you actually doing at this point?
A lot of worrying. So this time of year, you and unfortunately, the data supports the statement, but, there are, people in our industry thrive in structure. And what I mean by that goes for players, coaches, executives, and, we're used to the rigor, we're used to the discipline, and you worry about skilled players coming back out of shape. And that's why I think it's really sensible on how teams ramp up now, because the worst thing you want to do is have somebody, miss a material amount of time because, they're not in shape and they're out of condition. So you worry about that. Some teams have sent string coaches out to groups of guys, guys may work out together in Florida or Southern California, wherever it may be. But you're really trying to keep an eye on things, and especially obviously, for players, coming off of injuries, most notably, like yesterday, we were discussing Patrick Mahomes, and, look, there's going to be 8,000 eyes on that left knee, Jake, but you want to make sure that you don't create an ancillary issue like a hamstring or a groin or something like that. So you just want to make sure these guys are in the best position possible for training camp.
Mike Tannenbaum is our guest here at 880 ESPN New York, talking all things NFL with the ESPN NFL analyst. So you'll put yourself in the shoes of, let's say, Darren Muji, right? Geno Smith is accused of assault, and there's an open investigation, and now that's closed. But when the news first breaks, are you calling Geno, trying to hear his side of the story? When something like that happens and it involves, your projected starting quarterback, take us inside what the GM has to do in that moment.
Yeah, Jake, that's really true of any of your players, most notably with your quarterback, and certainly, anytime any potential issue with women, you take that ultra seriously. So you certainly want to talk to them, get their side of the story. Invariably, your security department will get involved. The NFL security department will get involved. And remember, for the personal conduct policy, there's two different standards. So one, you have the criminal, and I'm not suggesting, by the way, that Geno Smith's going to be suspended by any stretch. I'm just making the point that you have seen players over the years have some sort of discipline from the NFL, even when criminal, there was no criminal sanctions or, criminal trial. So there's sometimes, more than one governing body that you're trying to balance.
So he's, not going to be charged with anything, which is obviously good news. He was also stopped twice for two different traffic violations, which, in an isolated thing, okay, it happens. One was speeding, one was driving without the right tags in the vehicle. But both times, Mike, he didn't have his driver's license on him. And I just don't understand how a guy who's going to be 36, NFL quarterback, just can't carry his license on him. Hey, is it out of bounds for, Darren Muji or Aaron Glenn to say, hey, Geno, man, if you're going to drive, carry your license? What the heck's going on with that?
Yeah, look, I know that's not ideal, but I can be candid. Sometimes I don't have my license. This day and age, everything's on your phone. So again, I'm not making excuses, and you are, the most important employee on a $10 billion enterprise. But look, if that's the worst thing that happens, you're doing really well. Not ideal, but not the end of the world.
Mike Tannenbaum is our guest here. So Bart Scott said something on our air the other day that has had a bunch of the different shows debating and weighing in on. He said that for this year, he would rather take Geno Smith instead of Jackson Dart. Do you agree with a guy you once gave a lot of money to play for the Jets?
It's probably closer than people think, and here's why. I'm bullish on Jackson Dart. You and I talked about him quite a bit, but until he can prove that he can play in 17 games, that is part of the skill set of playing the quarterback position. So, look, for the next 10 years, no question, we're taking Jackson Dart. I want to see what he looks like. I want to see what he looks like in this offense, which is going to have some Brian Callahan, some Greg Roman, some Mike Bloomgren, some Matt Nagy. I think it's going to be a little bit more run focused, but Jackson Dart has to do a much better job of taking care of himself, because I think, to Bart's point, I think there's a much better chance of Geno Smith being there for 17 games than Dart.
What are your thoughts on how Geno and Frank Reich, what that potentially looks like for the Jet offense this year? Because Bart also believes that the Jet offense could be explosive. In fact, he went as far as saying he thinks they could be a top 7 offense in the league, Mike, which, again, I hope he's right, but just your thoughts on those comments there from Bart Scott.
Yeah, and look, Jake, I'm not a fantasy football guy, but, you think about guys like Kenyon Sadiq, Mason Taylor. I think those tight ends have a chance to be a big part of the offense. If you look at Frank's history and how he likes to incorporate the tight ends, it's, pretty significant. So, look, we'll see how it goes. But if you're seeing more and more teams use 12 personnel. The Rams, that were a top 5 offense a year ago, Sean McVay used 3 tight ends more than any other team. So I think we're seeing a little bit more of a pivot towards that. So I'm bullish on the offense, and I think if you got 2 tight ends that can block and make plays in the passing game, you become very hard to defend.
All right, Asmaniacs, listen up for a second. No matter what you're watching, whether it's New York sports or any game you didn't plan on caring about, there's no better way to stay locked in than with PrizePicks. It's daily fantasy made simple. You're just picking more or less on player projections. That's it. No complicated lineups, no nonsense. Just you versus the numbers. And here's why I love it. Even if it's a game you normally wouldn't care about, once you got a lineup going, you're locked in. Every play matters, every drive matters, every at-bat matters. I've been mixing sports too. Maybe a little football, throwing some baseball, maybe some basketball, and now you've got action across the board all night, and PrizePicks makes it even better with features like early cash outs if your picks are hitting, the ability to mix multiple sports in one lineup, and you can even see what other people are playing and tail their picks. So if you haven't tried it yet, what are you doing? Download the PrizePicks app right now. Use code HMA. That's HMA, and you'll get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, it's HMA on PrizePicks. PrizePicks, where it always feels good to be right.
When you look at the Jets' offensive personnel in general, Mike, you brought up a couple of those names, plus the offensive line. Brees was extended by the front office already. Garrett Wilson, of course, is a number 1 receiver, has been paid. Call me crazy, but I feel like if you just remove Jets from the helmet and just looked at the players they have, I understand what Bart's trying to say. I just have questions about the quarterback, of course, and I have questions about the OC, but I think they actually have some talent on that side of the ball.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the tackles. To me, like last year, the Chargers were doing great, and then, they lost Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater, and, that was basically it. And you look at Membu, Olufshanu, I think those guys are really young and talented tackles. The Patriots had a great year, but we saw the limitations of Will Campbell that ultimately came back to bite him, albeit in the Super Bowl. But, you show me a good offensive line, I'll show you good offense. So I agree they have to go out there and execute it, but on paper, the O-line is really solid. I love the tight end group, which we discussed. So I certainly think the arrow is up from where it was a year ago.
We're talking with Mike Tannenbaum, former Jets and Dolphins GM. Of course, Mike and I host New York Game Day every Sunday, starting at 8 a.m. until noon. We'll be back right before the NFL season gets underway, so make sure you stick around for that. I believe the first show is scheduled for September 6th. Mike, in terms of Aaron Glenn now. You and I, of course, debated his first year a lot, but he's here for a second year, and I hope he goes out there and he proves anyone doubting him wrong. What do you think will be the biggest thing Glenn can take from year one and try and improve on in year two?
Well, first of all, we got to wish him a happy birthday because today is his birthday.
Did you text him?
As it is, of course I did.
Well, nice job. Nice job.
Yeah, I also texted our ESPN teammate Mike Reese a happy birthday, who does a great job covering the Patriots for ESPN Boston. So anyway, look, I think Aaron Glenn is a guy we talked about this quite a bit, a very motivated guy who has incredibly high standards for himself. And nobody was probably a harder critic on the team last year than himself. So, look, this is a business where you and I both know, like, he may improve greatly, and if they win 3 games, that doesn't portend well for his future. So, in year two, you have to win games, and we'll get into tanking and what teams like the Miami Dolphins are doing and others, but you don't get, multiple years at this in the NFL. That's just the reality of it. But I'm very hopeful and certainly very impressed with, what they did in the offseason, both from the draft, the coaching staff, free agency. They should be markedly better. His hands will be all over the defense, and I think that bodes well.
He's now taking over the defense, as you brought up. How does that impact, his ability to still be the head coach of the team? Because a big criticism of Glenn in his first year, Mike, the clock management was rough at times, the in-game decision-making was tough, and now he's got more responsibilities in-game coordinating the defense. So your thoughts on how all that meshes?
Yeah, Jake, that's a totally fair point. And, that's one of the things when you interview coaches, you talk to them about is scaling leadership. Like, if you're an offensive coach, you invariably are getting a job because, you could scheme up players getting open and other things, Jake, but now you're in charge of the whole enterprise. So I'm sure Aaron has thought about, hey, if I'm making adjustments on the sideline, how do I know when to challenge? How do I know when to call a timeout? Like, that's where you have to rely on your coaching staff. And that's the job description, by the way. You're the head coach. So coaches do it differently. There was just a great article on ESPN.com by Seth Wickersham, who was embedded with the Broncos. And, Sean Payton, who's arguably a Hall of Fame head coach, in that article was talking about getting ready to play the Patriots in the championship game, and how he was talking about, hey, I got to give up play calling at some point because, I need to touch special teams. I need to touch defense. So, we're talking about Aaron Glenn in year 2, but here's, Sean Payton, I think in year 17, struggling with the same exact issue.
Mike Tannenbaum is our guest, talking all things NFL with him. Mike, as far as the Giants go, we brought up Dart earlier, but of course, Harbaugh's taken over year 1 for him at the helm. What would a successful first season look like, in your opinion, for John Harbaugh and the Giants?
It's probably a lot what we talked about last year with Aaron Glenn, like established credibility. I think John's a great coach. I think he's the right coach at the right time. And I think if we're talking about a successful season for them, Jake, you and I will be talking about the end of the halves, the penalties, the turnovers. Look, without Malik Neighbors, they're going to have to play differently early. Like, they added a lot of guys, but the Smith-Schusters and the OBJs, they're not Malik Neighbors, and I don't know where their explosive plays are going to come from. This was a team that struggled against the run a year ago. They moved on from Dexter Lawrence, so there are questions, but I think John Harbaugh will certainly tighten up the ship, and they'll look and feel differently than they did a year ago.
We've already heard people say that the OTAs and the mini camp was a lot tougher than it was under the previous coaching staff. Is that a good thing or a bad thing to have such a drastic change from what was previously done?
I remember going back a generation ago, our first year, Coach Parcells got hired in 97. The team won 1 game in 96. And I think a lot of people said the same thing about that 1997 training camp, which ironically Aaron Glenn was a player on. That year we won 9 games. The next year we were in the championship game. So it's probably exactly what the doctor ordered.
All right, Mike, last question for you. Going back to the appearance you did the other day on Unsportsmanlike, you were talking about how one of the questions that you would ask prospects at the Combine when you got a chance to interview them was, what is the best compliment that you've ever gotten? So I was like, I'm going to ask Mike when I have him on Thursday. So what is the best compliment that Mike Tannenbaum has ever received?
Oh, thanks for asking, Jake. Ironically, it was my first year as general manager in 2006. We made the playoffs, and Ron Wolf, who was my idol and mentor, called me to congratulate me, just to say, how hard it is to do that and accomplish that. And just to have some validation by somebody that I admired as much as I admired Ron Wolf was probably the biggest one. How about for you, Jake? What's the biggest compliment you've ever received?
You know what? It's actually from a guy who works at the station. And the guy who I'm filling in for right now. When I was in college, I had Michael Kay on my college radio show at the Super Bowl when it was in Houston before the Patriots and the Falcons played that year. And again, I'm doing a college show, and we had Michael on. He was nice enough to give us, about 10 minutes and do a radio hit with us. And, went great afterwards, said, thanks for coming on. And then the next day I see him walking over to us, and he pulls me aside. He goes, I just want to say, I thought you were awesome. Like, stay with this, keep doing it. I honestly forgot that you were in college, which is why I should have said this yesterday. And that always stuck with me. So I'll give some love to the K-Ster.
Wow. Good for you. And it says a lot about him that he would give a college student some time. So that's good for you and good for him.
Yep, no doubt. Mike, I look forward to working with you again this fall. Hopefully, when I text you for some appetizer recommendations, you come through in the clutch for that, all right?
There's not a lot I know a lot about. Appetizers is one of them.
Have a great day, Mike. Thanks for coming on.
All right. Thanks.